So this is the tunnel that Joaquin El Chapo Guzman came out of.
He has now escaped from prison for a second time.
This is Puente Grande Prison, the most secure facility in Mexico. It's renowned for its large guard presence, with 2 guards for each inmate, as the prison was dedicated to housing the most dangerous criminals in Mexico. Among these were top drug gang leaders. These aren't just ordinary criminals. They command tens of thousands of followers, heavily armed with every imaginable weapon. An attack on the prison is always a possibility. Therefore, the prison's walls were doubly fortified with heavy concrete reinforced by the strongest type of steel, watchtowers, heavily armed guards, and checkpoints along the road leading to the prison. The facility resembled a military base. This was where El Chapo, the most infamous and dangerous drug lord in Mexican and global history, was imprisoned. As the leader of the Sinaloa cartel, the world's most dangerous drug gang, El Chapo had been pursued for a long time and was first arrested in 1993 after an intense chase by Mexican authorities. Even though El Chapo was captured, it didn't stop him from running his empire from within the prison. He did this through extensive bribery. El Chapo bribed every single officer and guard in the prison, offering bribes worth millions, which afforded him a life of luxury. He lived like a king in prison. They provided him with alcohol, women, and all the food he wanted. They even allowed his 2 wives and mistresses to visit him and stay for days. Moreover, he had access to phones, allowing him to keep running his gang from inside the prison. The person who most facilitated El Chapo's life inside the prison was this man, Damaso Lopez. Damaso was the deputy chief of security at Puente Grande Prison. El Chapo bribed him to the extent that Damaso became his close confidant. He gave Damaso a house, a car, gifts, and a huge salary. This strengthened their relationship, and they became friends. Damaso was the main reason El Chapo lived in complete comfort inside the prison, able to do whatever he wanted. During his imprisonment, El Chapo not only managed to keep his gang operational, but he also developed a new method for drug trafficking from inside the prison. This method wasn't his invention, but he and his gang revolutionized it. Drug trafficking through tunnels. El Chapo hired engineers, architects, and specialists to dig professional-grade tunnels. Certainly El Chapo, through these tunnels, was targeting the US, their most profitable market. The Sinaloa cartel no longer needed to smuggle drugs by air, sea, or land. They became smugglers through underground tunnels, which allowed them to increase smuggling rates exponentially. They began making $20 million per month. Imagine that El Chapo's empire expanded and grew more while he was in prison than when he was free. Mexico didn't extradite drug gang leaders like El Chapo to the US, despite the US constantly demanding it. The US was most affected, as vast quantities of drugs were smuggled into their country, so they always asked for El Chapo's extradition and other criminals like him. US prisons are more fortified than Mexico's, and in the US, El Chapo would be far from his gang and the officers he had bribed, meaning he would no longer have control over his gang. However, the Mexican authorities refused, claiming they were capable of handling their criminals. This allowed El Chapo to feel at ease, knowing he could do whatever he wanted in Puente Grande Prison. He never even thought about escaping. However, in 2001, the Mexican Supreme Court proposed a new law allowing the extradition of certain Mexican criminals to the US. El Chapo felt threatened when he first heard about the new law, so he immediately began planning an escape, which had to be executed as soon as possible. A few weeks later, El Chapo had already devised a solid plan and began executing it. El Chapo knew that only a few people should be involved, so he gave a huge bribe to his assistant Damaso and told him explicitly that he wanted to escape. Damaso assured him that he would help. El Chapo agreed with Damaso to reduce the number of guards on January 19, 2001, the day he planned to escape. Of course, Damaso wouldn't reduce the number of guards in the entire prison, only in the section where El Chapo was held. El Chapo also bribed a prison worker named Chito, one of the workers responsible for laundry. Chito's main task was to collect dirty clothes from the inmates, place them inside a cart, and take them outside the prison to a van that would transport them to the laundry facility. Chito was the best choice for El Chapo because he was just a regular worker who went unnoticed. He only did his usual daily tasks, and none of the guards paid attention to him. The day had come. On January 19, 2001, Chito opened El Chapo's cell, helped him into the laundry cart, covered him with clothes, and pushed the cart. They managed to do all this comfortably due to the reduced number of guards in that section. At one point, as Chito pushed the cart, He reached a prison gate where a guard was stationed. Cheeto stopped the cart and left it to speak with the guard and ask him to open the gate. But due to El Chapo's weight, the cart began to roll backward on its own. In that moment, El Chapo feared the cart would hit the wall, tip over, and expose them. But Cheeto quickly ran behind the cart and stopped it before it hit the wall. He then continued normally to the prison parking lot where a car was waiting. El Chapo quickly got into the trunk and they drove out of the prison. By the way, the car was driven by a bribed guard. As a result, when they reached the prison exit gate, no one stopped them or searched the car. They were allowed to leave immediately. Although the escape was quickly discovered, the pursuit was delayed because most of the local police were on El Chapo's payroll. This gave him the time he needed to get far from the prison. Eventually, the federal police were informed of El Chapo's escape, and this police force is much harder to bribe than the local police. The federal forces began the pursuit while El Chapo's men waited for him near the prison. When he reached them, they switched cars, and he was taken in an armored vehicle to another location where a helicopter was waiting. He boarded the helicopter, which took him to yet another location where another armored car awaited. They moved him through 4 different locations to ensure he couldn't be tracked. The last car El Chapo took was in Mexico City. While driving through the streets, El Chapo looked around and noticed he was surrounded by police cars and motorcycles. He became stressed and worried, asking the driver how they managed to track his location. The driver reassured him that he had nothing to worry about because all the police around him were actually there for his protection. El Chapo took a deep breath and felt relieved. The corrupt police were surrounding him to prevent the real police from reaching him. No one would ever suspect that El Chapo was being escorted by that many police cars. They accompanied him until they reached one of the gang's safe houses. El Chapo's 2001 escape turned him into a legend, to the point that many believed he was above the law and untouchable. Although the Mexican authorities dedicated substantial resources to capturing El Chapo, they were unable to reach him, and he remained free for 14 years. During this time, El Chapo moved between his secret safe houses, many of which were located in isolated areas in the mountains. Over these 14 years, El Chapo's empire grew immensely. He continued smuggling billions of dollars worth of cocaine into the US annually. The Sinaloa cartel expanded its operations and territories in Mexico to unprecedented levels. The Sinaloa cartel became the largest drug cartel in the world, surpassing even the Medellin cartel, which was Escobar's cartel. Reaching this level of power, influence, and control was impossible without violence. Consequently, acts of violence were rampant, particularly in the northern cities of Mexico, the ones bordering the US. These cities were used for drug trafficking and were transformed into war zones. El Chapo and his gang turned these cities into battlefields, causing unprecedented killings and mass destruction. El Chapo systematically dismantled other gangs, one by one, taking over the northern areas. This made him the largest and sole dominator of the drug trafficking routes from Mexico to the US. The American and Mexican authorities were determined to capture him at any cost, utilizing all their most powerful resources for this mission. In 2014, 14 years after El Chapo's escape, Mexican intelligence, with assistance from their American counterparts, adopted a new strategy, targeting those around El Chapo, such as his sons, wives, and close associates, as they were the ones who knew him best. Thanks to this new strategy, they managed to track down El Chapo's technical assistant, a young Colombian in his 20s. The intelligence team persuaded him to cooperate, and with his help, they were able to hack the encrypted communication network used by El Chapo and his gang. Through this method, they identified his location, learning that he was in a house in Sinaloa, the gang's headquarters. The house was one of El Chapo's safe houses. After pinpointing the house's location on February 17, 2014, Mexican special forces, along with DEA agents, surrounded the house and stormed it. However, the house wasn't ordinary. Behind the main door was another steel door. The special forces continued pounding on the door, trying to break it down. Meanwhile, El Chapo was asleep inside. Suddenly, his assistant burst into his room, screaming that the Mexican army was at the door. El Chapo jumped out of bed, hearing the sounds of the battering ram against the steel door. He began moving quickly. The forces outside the house noticed movement through the windows and intensified their efforts on the door. The windows were also fortified. The entire house was armored, and because the windows were small, making it difficult to enter through them, the focus remained on the door. They continued pounding the door until it finally gave way. The forces stormed the house with their weapons raised, ordering everyone inside to surrender and lie down on the ground. But they were shocked to find no one inside the house. They searched every room and corner but found no one, even though they had seen shadows moving inside when they were outside. Where had El Chapo gone? When his assistant had alerted him, El Chapo had gone to the bathroom, not to hide, but to escape through a tunnel. El Chapo's gang had become experts in tunneling, not only for drug smuggling but also for escaping. All their safe houses were equipped with underground tunnels. If the house was surrounded by the police, El Chapo could easily escape. El Chapo managed to flee through a tunnel dug under the bathtub, and this is an actual image of the tunnel after it was discovered by the Mexican authorities. The tunnel entrance was cleverly disguised so that no one would discover it unless they knew about it. To open the secret entrance, a pin had to be inserted into a small opening behind the bathroom mirror, creating an electric current that unlocked the mechanism holding the bathtub. Then the bathtub could be lifted by hand. The bathtub would easily rise thanks to hydraulic arms supporting it from beneath. Once inside the tunnel, El Chapo pulled the bathtub back into place and sealed it behind him. Because of this, the storming forces took their time searching the house until they discovered the secret entrance. El Chapo escaped with his wife, assistant, and chef through the tunnel, and by the time the special forces found the tunnel entrance, they had already vanished. El Chapo decided to go somewhere unexpected, a place where no one would think to look for him. Instead of retreating to one of his isolated safe houses, he headed to a coastal city called Mazatlan, a tourist destination where no one would suspect he might be. But what El Chapo didn't know was that his communication network had been hacked. He believed the authorities had found his safe house by chance, but he didn't realize they could find him wherever he went. 5 days after escaping from the safe house, on February 22, 2014, Mexican authorities, along with American agents, tracked El Chapo to a hotel in Mazatlan named Miramar, where they surrounded him and easily arrested him in his room. The attached image is an actual photo taken at the moment of his arrest. He had no protection or guards and didn't expect that they would easily identify his location, as he didn't know his phone was hacked. After El Chapo's second arrest, he was sent to Altiplano Prison, a maximum security facility and the most fortified prison in Mexico. You may wonder why they didn't send him to this prison the first time. The simple reason is that when El Chapo was first arrested in 1993, Altiplano Prison had just been established and wasn't as fortified as it was in 2014, when El Chapo was arrested for the second time. This prison resembled a military base due to the abundance of guards, weapons, and equipment within it. The outer walls were surrounded by numerous watchtowers, each manned by 3 or 4 armed guards with heavy weapons. Although the prison walls were made of nets, they were doubled or even tripled in some areas. The net fences were constructed and reinforced with heavy concrete, a full meter thick. There were even ditches. All these fortifications were in place to prevent any external attack. As mentioned before, the imprisoned criminals had special armies, so they had to be ready for any external assault. The prison even had armored vehicles. Additionally, the entire prison area was a no-fly zone, and there were reports that they had anti-aircraft weapons to defend against any air attacks. Communication networks within the prison were disrupted, meaning mobile phones wouldn't work. Most importantly, the officers and guards in this prison were carefully selected to prevent bribery. Despite housing the biggest criminals and gang leaders in Mexico, none of them had managed to escape until El Chapo arrived. As soon as El Chapo entered the prison, he began contemplating an escape plan, fearing extradition to America at any moment. Since mobile phones didn't work inside the prison, his only way to communicate with the outside world was through the people allowed to visit him, which were only 2: his lawyer, Scar Lopez, and his third wife, Emma Coronel, his young wife, whom he married in 2007 and who was 32 years younger than him. El Chapo began coordinating with his wife so she could relay messages to his children and followers. His 4 children were all leaders within his gang, but after his imprisonment, none took over the gang's leadership. Instead, El Chapo relied on another man who wasn't a family member, but whom he considered his right hand, Damaso Lopez, the deputy chief of security at Puente Grande prison, the corrupt official who had allowed El Chapo to do whatever he wanted in that prison. After El Chapo's escape in 2001, Damaso was blamed and considered an accomplice, leading to his dismissal and inability to find another job. As mentioned before, Damaso and El Chapo were friends, which is why El Chapo asked him to join the gang. Over the years, Damaso continued to rise through the ranks until he became El Chapo's right hand in the gang and eventually took over as the leader after El Chapo's second imprisonment. Damaso transformed from a prison security official into the leader of the world's most powerful drug cartel. Now, El Chapo began communicating with Damaso and his children through his wife, instructing them to get him out of prison as soon as possible before he could be extradited to America. He was genuinely afraid of this possibility. Damaso and El Chapo's children began formulating a plan to free their leader from prison. Since Damaso was an ex-security official at one of the most fortified prisons in Mexico, he had the advantage of understanding the prison's security systems. On the other hand, El Chapo spent most of his time in his cell, only allowed out for an hour each day. A GPS tracker was attached to his ankle at all times, and his cell was under 24-hour surveillance. Cameras were installed inside his cell, and even in the shower, a small wall provided him some privacy. El Chapo knew that escaping from this prison was nearly impossible, but he was determined to try at any cost. And since we're talking about El Chapo and his gang, it's obvious that a tunnel would be involved in the plan. But how would they dig it, and from where? The digging couldn't start inside the prison. The tunnel would have to be dug from outside, leading into the prison. This might be the first time in history that we hear about prisoners digging a tunnel for their escape from inside the prison. But in this case, the tunnel had to be dug from outside, leading into the prison. The beginning of the digging couldn't be inside the prison. It had to start outside, leading in. But how would they locate El Chapo's exact cell? Moreover, the cell was heavily surveilled, and even if they managed to dig a tunnel that reached the cell, how would they get him out without being exposed? The only blind spot was the small shower behind the small wall, so the tunnel's exit had to be in that shower area. But how? How could they dig an underground tunnel from outside the prison, almost 1.5 kilometers in length, without seeing anything, and open an exit specifically in that small space? The plan seemed impossible. Reaching the cell itself would be a significant achievement, let alone pinpointing that exact small spot. To solve this problem, El Chapo had a brilliant idea to help his men identify his cell location, specifically that small area behind the wall. The idea was inspired by the GPS tracker on his ankle. He planned to smuggle a GPS device into the prison and place it in that shower space so his men digging the tunnel could easily identify the exact location. The idea was perfect, but the challenge was smuggling the GPS device into the prison. Altiplano was Mexico's most fortified prison, and smuggling anything inside was nearly impossible. There were numerous checkpoints inside and outside the prison, and they wouldn't allow any tool that could be used for escape or as a weapon to pass through. El Chapo had another smart idea. He instructed his wife to have the gang hide the small GPS device inside a watch. This way, it could pass through all the checkpoints without suspicion. His wife successfully smuggled the watch to him without raising any suspicion. It was just a regular watch, which the guards didn't perceive as a threat. Through that watch and the GPS device, El Chapo's men could pinpoint the exact location of that specific spot behind the small wall. By then, El Chapo's men had already begun digging the tunnel toward the prison, but once they had the exact location, they knew how to direct the digging accurately. As mentioned earlier, they were experts in tunnel construction, so the tunnel they built was a marvel of engineering on all levels. The entrance to the tunnel was in the building. Upon looking at the tunnel opening, one could see a colossal number of wooden supports. Upon entering the 10-meter deep tunnel, it became clear that this wasn't just an ordinary escape tunnel. It was meticulously constructed, and undoubtedly the best escape tunnel ever built in the history of prison breakouts. Such a tunnel required a lot of workers, most likely 10 to 12 people working non-stop. First, they needed a ventilation system, so they laid ventilation pipes along the kilometer they dug, with an air pumping machine at the tunnel's entrance. They also needed lighting, so they hung thousands of light bulbs along the tunnel, powered by an electricity generator hidden at the tunnel's entrance, disguised to look like a cement grilling table. Everything was hidden. Nothing was visible from outside the brick building. This was crucial in case of a sudden security search, ensuring nothing would be discovered below unless a thorough inspection was conducted. This was essential since they were located somewhat close to the prison. The scale of the operation was enormous, involving thousands of meters of ventilation pipes, thousands of lamps, and tons of sand extracted from underground. They managed to dispose of all this without being exposed, especially since they were 1.5 kilometers away from the prison. The ground was flat and empty, making it remarkable that none of the guards, particularly those in the watchtowers, noticed them. This proves that El Chapo's gang meticulously planned the operation and took all necessary precautions. Moreover, inside the tunnel, they constructed a railroad on which they placed a customized excavation cart, seemingly integrated with a motorcycle, which they used to transport the sand and later to help their leader escape. Throughout the digging process, El Chapo was nervous and anxious, fearing his extradition to America. For this reason, he constantly sent letters to his men, questioning why the process was taking so long. They always responded that the task wasn't simple, requiring careful planning and effort, and that they had to be meticulous in their work. Finally, in June 2015, El Chapo received news from his men that the tunnel was nearly ready. El Chapo chose July 4th, 2015, as the day for his escape. Why July 4th? Because he wanted to insult America. July 4th is a national holiday in America, celebrating Independence Day. It's a significant day for Americans. By escaping on this day, El Chapo intended to send a message of insult to them, to show them that he managed to escape on their day of celebration. El Chapo harbored a deep hatred for America, even though all his wealth came from there. He knew how much the American authorities wanted him and knew they constantly pressured the Mexican authorities for his extradition. Unfortunately, his men couldn't complete the tunnel in time. The tunnel still required work, so they were forced to postpone the escape for a week. Finally, the big day arrived. July 11th, 2015, the day El Chapo would break out of prison after spending nearly 16 months there. This video footage is from the surveillance cameras in his cell. That night, El Chapo watched a comedy series on his small tablet with the volume turned up to mask the sounds his men were making as they opened the tunnel's entrance. Periodically, he got up from his bed and walked around the room, waiting for a signal from his men. At 8:10, El Chapo sat on the edge of his bed, put on his shoes, and walked to the shower area, the only spot in his cell hidden from the surveillance cameras. Since that moment, El Chapo vanished. El Chapo entered the opening and descended a ladder into the underground tunnel, where he met his wife's brother, who pointed to the cart and instructed him to get on. El Chapo quickly got on the cart and sped through the tunnel. When he reached the other end of the tunnel, he emerged into the brick building, where a quad bike was waiting. He got on the bike with one of his men and rode away. Meanwhile, the prison guards took 40 minutes to discover his escape. They noticed on the surveillance cameras that El Chapo wasn't in his cell and immediately went to check. Initially, they thought he might be hiding behind the shower wall, but they were shocked to find the tunnel opening. Sirens blared, declaring a state of emergency, but it was too late. By that time, El Chapo had already traveled a long distance. He then reached a large truck, climbed into the trailer, and his men sealed it tightly to avoid detection. The truck drove for about 2 hours before arriving in a town called San Juan, located in an area known as Querétaro. There, El Chapo boarded a private jet piloted by one of his most trusted associates. This time, El Chapo took all necessary precautions, leaving nothing to chance. 2 jets were involved. The first jet carried El Chapo to his destination, while the second was used to mislead any pursuers. El Chapo decided to hide in one of his safe houses, a fortress-like structure located in the mountains of Sinaloa. It was the most secure and fortified place for El Chapo, which they referred to as the Sky. El Chapo's escape caused great embarrassment to the Mexican authorities, who had boasted about his capture just a year earlier, considering it a major victory in the war against drugs and crime. The Mexican authorities dedicated a significant portion of their resources to tracking down El Chapo at any cost. If El Chapo had stayed hidden in his secret mountain hideouts, it would have been difficult for the authorities to find him. But El Chapo kept moving from city to city, visiting his gang's headquarters, meeting with his followers, and giving orders. This was crucial for maintaining his control and leadership over the gang, but it also put him in danger and made tracking him easier, especially since the Mexican authorities were receiving full support from the Americans, who provided them with all sorts of advanced tracking and monitoring technologies. Mexican intelligence, with American assistance, managed to locate a house in Los Mochis, a city in the north of Sinaloa state. In this house, the intelligence team noticed activity from El Chapo's gang. They began eavesdropping on their communications and noticed they used the nickname Grandma to refer to a specific person. For example, they'd say, "Grandma is coming, prepare for Grandma." It became clear they were referring to someone important, and the intelligence team suspected it might be El Chapo himself. Indeed, the next day, a convoy of 3 cars arrived, indicating that someone important was inside. The first time the cars arrived, they entered the garage directly, preventing the agents monitoring the house from identifying who was inside. So, the Mexican intelligence continued eavesdropping on their calls and monitoring the house for a while, during which they became almost certain that El Chapo was inside. This suspicion was confirmed after hearing what seemed to be his voice through the wiretaps. as well as the fact that such preparations and protection would only be for someone like El Chapo. On the morning of January 8, 2016, 6 months after El Chapo's escape, the Mexican forces, backed by DEA agents, decided to storm the house. A group of special forces surrounded the building, and a bloody armed conflict ensued between them and El Chapo's followers. The violence was intense, and all the casualties were on the gang's side. As for the special forces, some were injured, but none died due to their meticulous and well-prepared assault. However, after the fight ended, they didn't find El Chapo. He had escaped once again through an underground tunnel. The mirror in the house was a secret door leading to the tunnel. While his followers fought the special forces, El Chapo fled through the tunnel with one of his close associates. After emerging from the tunnel, they stole a passing car. The security forces weren't just surrounding the house, they were spread throughout the area. When they received news of El Chapo's escape, patrols immediately began combing the area. About 20 kilometers from the house, at a checkpoint, 4 federal police officers managed to arrest El Chapo and his associate. El Chapo immediately tried to bribe them, but unfortunately for him, these officers weren't corrupt, and they refused his bribe. This angered El Chapo, causing him to act out, insulting and threatening them. However, the officers ignored his threats, took a picture of him, and sent it to their commander, who informed them that special forces were on their way. The commander also warned them that El Chapo's men and associates were mobilizing to rescue their leader. He ordered them to take shelter in a nearby motel and prepare for any sudden attack from El Chapo's gang. The 4 officers and El Chapo took refuge in one of the motel rooms, where they waited and monitored the situation. After a while, they began hearing the sounds of approaching vehicles, as if a large convoy was moving slowly toward them. At that moment, El Chapo smirked maliciously and said to the officers, "Now you probably wish you had accepted my offer." But his smile quickly faded into shock and despair as the convoy arrived, and he realized these weren't his men, but a massive number of soldiers from the army and special forces. They surrounded the motel, securing all entrances and exits. El Chapo's men were taken by surprise and couldn't even think of approaching the motel once they saw the heavy security presence. El Chapo was arrested for the 3rd time and sent back to Altiplano prison, the same facility he had escaped from before. But this time, El Chapo was under constant heavy surveillance. Nevertheless, he began planning yet another escape. He sent messages to his gang, instructing them to plan another breakout. According to some gang members, they had already started working on a new escape plan, eerily similar to the last one. By now, the Mexican authorities were expediting his extradition to America, realizing it was the only solution. El Chapo had escaped from Puente Grande in 2001 and remained a fugitive for 14 years. He also escaped through a tunnel beneath a bathtub when they surrounded him in one of his safe houses. He escaped from Altiplano prison, Mexico's most fortified prison, and he escaped for the 4th time through the tunnel behind a mirror in another safe house. How long could they keep chasing him? If he remained in Mexico, he would undoubtedly find a way to escape again because his men and followers were all around him. But in the US, he wouldn't be able to do anything. For this reason, the court expedited his extradition. Imagine that the judge working on his extradition case was assassinated in October 2016. El Chapo's extradition was postponed for a year, but eventually, one day in January 2017, El Chapo was surprised when guards and soldiers entered his cell, tied him up, and took him to a helicopter waiting in the prison yard. He was then flown to a special plane. He hadn't realized what was happening yet. The plane landed in New York, and as El Chapo disembarked, he tried to comprehend what was happening. He looked around, confused. El Chapo asked one of the DEA agents, "Where am I?" The agent replied, "You're in New York." And this is a picture of the most powerful drug gang leader in history, with tears in his eyes, a historical moment. El Chapo was tried in the US, and the trial lasted a long time, during which many details, witnesses, and testimonies emerged. In 2019, El Chapo was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 30 years. He's currently held in a prison known as ADX, or Florence Supermax, located in Colorado, USA. This prison is considered the most secure in America. It houses inmates deemed extremely dangerous, even to other prisoners, meaning all inmates are kept in solitary confinement, with limited interaction even with the gods. El Chapo spends 23 hours a day in his cell and is allowed out for only 1 hour in strictly monitored indoor areas. I'm sure El Chapo has thought about escaping many times, but I believe he sheds tears when he realizes he is far from all his power and influence. We've reached the end of our story. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos.